Good morning and welcome to What You Need to Know About the Law. As you know, my name is Jonathan Kane, and we bring you what you need to know about the law every Saturday morning here on from the law offices of Kane and Vitale.
Bonjour, c'est avocat Jonathan Kane qui vient parler avec nous en direct de bureau li, Law Offices of Jonathan Kane, concernant tout sortes à doué qu'on est sous affaire la loi.
And as you know, we have a format here on What You Need to Know About the Law, and we're trying a new format here, which is we are coming to you live from our offices in Broward, and we're taking your phone calls at the end of the show, where you can call here live at 954-523-5123, and we'll be able to take your questions. That's 954-523-5123 or 305-545-5123. And we will take some calls later in the show after we talk about some of the things that I think you need to know about the law.
Nous en direct de cabinet médical qui dans Broward et là nous ouvrir téléphone nous n'a des opportunités ouvrir nous avec question dans 954 123 53.
Again, I do remind you, as you know, if you listen to this show, and we've been doing this now for over 30 years together on Saturday morning. If you've been listening to this show, you should know by now that we do have something that we do here at Kane and Vitale, and that's that we offer a free consultation. And that is something that is a service I think that I know we're very proud of here at the office because it gives us an opportunity to give back to the community in as much as I think that information is key in life. So when you have a legal problem or a question about the law, you can always give us a call. And if I can't help you, I'm going to do my best to point you in the right direction.
Nous avons venu comme ça, maintenant, et on l'autre offre que cabinet médical continue à toujours. Et ben nous consultation gratuite, mettez-le facile pour nous parler avec avocat concernant n'importe quel problème légal nous t'as pas gagné.
This morning, I wanted to start off with something that we haven't talked about in a while, but something that, of course, I hope none of you have to deal with, but something that is a fact of life here in Florida and everywhere, and that is dissolution of marriage, or what we call divorce.
Alors, Mathieu, nous voulons parler concernant un sujet que nous avons beaucoup de temps pas parler sur lui. C'est mariage, que ça pas marché, nous voulons faire un divorce.
Florida is like many states now. Most states are what we call a no-fault state, which means that you only have to not want to be married in order to get a divorce. It used to be in most states you had to prove fault, maybe adultery or some other fault on your spouse. Now it is just a simple no-fault state, which means that either party, the husband or the wife, just has to plead that they no longer want to be married, that the marriage is irretrievably broken.
Alors, en Floride, ou pas besoin spécifique ni à quel autre monde pour que vous manquez un divorce. Tout simplement pas marier encore, eh bien, vous capable de demander un divorce sans que vous soyez obligé à le prouver que vous avez divorcé avec lui à te faire un acte malhonnête.
And you have to, by the way, either party can file for the divorce, the husband or the wife. All you have to do is prove that there was a valid marriage and that one of the parties has been a resident of the state of Florida for at least 6 months before filing the divorce. Those are really the two key things. One, that you plead that the marriage is broken, irretrievably broken, and also that you have lived in the state of Florida for at least 6 months prior to filing for divorce.
Nous besoin que le mariage là fini, pas gagner que nous capable de faire ça. Et deuxièmement, dans l'état côté nous a demandé divorce là, on en zone ça, nous t'es là pendant 6 mois ou plus.
And there's really no defense to it. If one party wants to get divorced, they can get divorced. The only thing the court can do is require the parties to go to counseling for up to 90 days before granting the divorce. But other than the 6-month requirement, that's another reason they won't divorce you. But the circumstances of the divorce do not matter. As long as one party wants it, then they are able to get it. Again, the court can only uh, require some counseling before granting the divorce.
Alors, pas de rien, yon moun capable de faire pour empêcher yon l'autre moun de divorce, si lui-même lui décide de vle faire ça. Non, court là lui-même, depuis que moun nan dit mariage ça fini, il y a vu dans zone côté l'allemand divorce ça pendant 6 mois, et bien court là a bali li. Et dans certains cas, yon capable de aller dans conseil côté que pour ouais, si yon capable de résoudre différences si gon moun qui t'a une nécessité pour ça.
And there's no question that when we talk about divorce and dissolution of marriage, it can be very highly emotional. I am certainly aware that it can be um, not only emotional but traumatic for couples, especially when there are children involved. So it's important to understand legal rights, legal obligations that each spouse has, and understand what the process is going to be about.
Eh bien, dans le mariage, si gen ti moun yo, gen certaines considérations qui pour fait en termes de bien-être ti moun yo, et chaque parti a gagné pour yo connaître sa responsabilité yo et devoir yo yé dans circonstances ça yo.
And by the way, on not every single divorce case even needs an attorney. They do have really good processes in the court system for simple divorces. I do believe that if you have children and property involved, it's important to speak to an attorney to provide you some legal advice to let you know what the statutory rules are about. But there's a lot of great information in each of the county court systems.
Alors, c'est pas que les gens qui ont pas système qui dans court là, qui est incorporé dans court système là, pour divorcer, pour pas monde qui pas capable de faire si nous-mêmes nous capables. Ça, c'est le cas qu'on monde qui est bien il est bon pour nous consulter avec un avocat, nous capables de connaître l'information ça.
Another common thing that is starting to become more popular before we get into the actual process of divorce is something called collaborative law. And this is a divorce where it is done in a more amicable fashion. It's done in a settlement type of situation, and it's done with trained professionals, usually a mediator. Rather than both parties hiring their own attorney, they can hire a mediator who tries to act in the middle and get the parties to understand the law a little bit, what their rights are, and then help them try to get a settlement without fighting back and forth with lawyers in court.
En pile fois qu'on gagne du poste côté que gagne nécessité pour gagner un médiateur qui pour aider les deux parties arriver à une résolution de différences que peut-être tu as gagné dans ça qui a rapport avec divorce là, sans que ce pas nécessaire pour chaque monde obligé à gagner un avocat à le plaider devant la cour.
This can be a good situation for people that have limited funds, don't want to spend a tremendous amount of money on lawyers. It can help, I think, if there's children involved because it is a friendlier process, but it is voluntary. You do not have to do this collaborative process. It's a new thing that has started to pop up more and more in these cases, and it's something you should be aware of.
Alors, nous pas obligés de faire ça parce que en pile fois, il y a un pile monde qui va dépenser un paquet d'argent en divorce, les gagnent un paquet de points que vous pas 40 ans sur eux-mêmes. Mais c'est une autre façon qui gagne à disposition si nous voulons faire ça.
When we talk about dissolution or divorce, there's two types of divorce that are most common here in Florida. The most common is going to be a regular dissolution of marriage, and that's usually when we're talking, or that is when we're talking about either children involved or issues of property and assets and debts involved. Then you would do a normal dissolution of marriage and go through that process.
Alors, les Simon, eh bien, là, ça est nécessaire pour nous faire un divorce à courant normal, parce que il y a un pile ici qui gagne pour décider là-dedans.
There's another type of divorce, and that's much easier, and that is called a simplified divorce. That's called the simple divorce, and that is when there are no children and no property that the court has to deal with. The only real issue is that the two parties have decided between the two of them that they no longer want to be married and they are filing for divorce. So if there are no children, no property, you can file what we call a simple divorce, and obviously it's more simple than a full-blown divorce, much quicker as well.
Alors, bon, le divorce, c'est le divorce simplifié. Ça, c'est le côté, pas gain rien du, pas gain bien, pas gain dette, pas gain simone, pas gain propriété, pas gain. Donc, c'est parti, tu dois simplifier les choses et puis faire un divorce. On fait autre.
The process begins kind of like a regular lawsuit, but instead of filing a complaint like we do in a lawsuit, with the dissolution of marriage, we file something called a petition for dissolution of marriage, which is filed with the court. Um, and it's filed in the county where you and your spouse last lived, or where one of the party counties where the party resides.
Alors, divorce, ça, nous-mêmes, nous sommes capables de remplir un papier qui peut nous permettre et ou déposer ça dans quoi dans la localité pour côté correcté.
And then all that has to be done is the spouse who's deciding to file for the divorce, they just file a petition. And again, we talked about it. All they have to do is say that they've lived in the state of Florida and prove it, by the way. You can't just say you live in the state of Florida. You got to show proof that you've lived in the state of Florida for at least 6 months and that the marriage is irretrievably broken. Once you file that petition, you then have to serve it with the sheriff or a process server like you would in a regular lawsuit. And then your spouse, once they receive the divorce or the petition, they're going to have 20 days to respond to the petition like they would a regular complaint. So the process is you file the dissolution, the person is served, and then they have 20 days to respond to that petition with however they choose to respond.
Alors, une fois que ça, de dissolution mariage a fini et nous déposer à la cour, eh bien, nous avons pas acheter un département ou un process server, il y a un monde qui peut délivrer papier ça, by monde que ou a demandé divorce là de lui-même, non? Et là, il finit recevoir papier ça, lui-même, il gagne 20 jours pour faire une réponse à la cour à vous-même.
And then what happens in every divorce case, one of the things that you should be prepared for before you even start to file for divorce is to make sure you're getting your finances together, because Florida requires, when you are getting divorced, that each party provides certain financial documents and a completed financial affidavit to the other party within 45 days of service. And that document basically lists out all of your assets and your debts, and also list your income, and you do sometimes have to provide proof of that via your tax returns or your W-2 forms.
Alors, l'autre bagaille que nous avons gagné pour nous faire avant que nous allons retenir un divorce, c'est mettre finances nous dans l'ordre. Ça veut dire que dans l'affidavit que nous avons gagné pour remplir dans le divorce, chaque monde a gagné pour mettre là-dedans toute dette, tout ça, possédé, et yo capable supporter ça par copie papier taxe en termes de income que vous faites dans le travail.
And by the way, it's important you get this stuff together before you file, especially if you're the spouse that's filing, because it is mandatory in all cases where you're talking about financial relief. If it's a simple divorce, there's no assets, no property, no nothing, then that isn't the issue. But anytime we're dealing with property, assets, and children, you're going to have to file this mandatory financial disclosure. And failure to do that can result from the court even dismissing your case or not even considering your requests in the case. So again, the court is going to require you to provide a financial affidavit and a financial information so that your spouse or their attorney can review it to make certain decisions about the case.
Alors, dans le cas où on divorce simple, pas de monde, pas de bien, pas de rien, ebyen yon affidavit financier pa pral nesesèr pou nou mèm. Dans l'autre ka yo, kote ke genyen séparation de biens ki pou fèt allocation de dette que chaque monde gagne, eh bien, WAP gagne pour remplir papier ça de 45 jours à partir de date que vous déposez papier au monde recevoir la main pour bailler information ça sur affidavit financier ça.
Now, like anything else, there are sometimes exceptions. Very rarely you can both agree not to file anything. But again, these are used not only to determine the assets and debts of the parties, but it's also going to be used to help the parties deal with child support and doing a child support guidelines, which is also going to be required if there are children involved. We have to fill out the child support guidelines, which is going to outline each parent's obligation for child support under the circumstances based on their finances, which is one of the big reasons, again, that it is mandatory that you file these financial documents.
Et si gen ti moun, apral genyen papye pou child support ki apral genyen pou prepare en foye à la cour. C'est peut-être ça qui fait important pour déclaration financière yo fait, de manière que pour capable attribuer et support pour ti moun yo basé de income que chaque parent yo fait.
Now, how does this process work? Well, like any other case, we're going to file our petition. The other side is going to respond, and then the court is going to require that both parties go to mediation. And that is true in most lawsuits. If you've had any kind of car accident, or even a workers' compensation accident, before you can go in front of the judge and have your case heard, you are required that you and your spouse work out a mediation, which is basically an arrangement, a settlement arrangement where both parties can make an agreement without going through the trial process. And that whole process is aided by a mediator.
Alors, une fois que nous finissons de déposer papier pour divorce là, shérif délivrer et mon a gagné 20 jours pour faire réponse li. Et si gagne ti moun gen séparation de biens et tout ça, nous capables arranger pour que nous tout rempli papier financier yo et papier child support. Mais les mandataires à ce moment-là pour nous aller en médiation de manière pour que nous capables résoudre tout problème qui gagne si que ça capable fait avant que nous présenter devant le juge là.
And this mediation process is pretty straightforward. The mediators, you can either hire them privately with your attorneys, but each county, at least in Broward and Dade, I don't know every Florida county, but the local counties all have their own in-house mediation program, and they do have them at very discounted prices for the time. And again, you're going to try to mediate, make a resolution before going to court. If you can do that, well, then you're going to have a settlement between the parties, and you can have a very simple divorce once that process is done. Also, obviously, spouses can agree on some or all of the issues before they go to mediation or even without mediation. Of course, if they have good lawyers working together, sometimes the property can be worked out, the parenting plan can be worked out, and of course, child support and any other support can be worked out without even mediation.
Alors, dans le cas ça, comme nous entendez, les que nous pour médiation, nous capables soit employer médiateur par nous, ou en pile dans court, dans Dade Broward, court système n'a gain médiateur qui là que nous capables embaucher à des prix très réduits et que eux même nous capables aider nous arriver sur un agrément concernant distribution de biens nous, concernant child support, concernant visite. Donc, si ça capable arranger dans stage ça, de là que nous gagnons pour aller devant le juge là pour faire jugement, lui-même, il va gagner trop de bagages à résoudre parce que nous déjà avons un temps qui est en place. Nous sommes capables de faire la médiation, ou nous-mêmes, nous sommes capables de faire entre nous-mêmes et avocat pour présenter notre.
Now, I'm not telling you that you should always settle a case, but I can tell you, especially in divorce, in my opinion, reaching agreement before going in front of the judge and fighting gives both parties an opportunity to at least create their own situation, understanding the law, but not leaving it all up to a judge.
Alors, médiation, nous capables de dire que c'est une façon côté que les deux parties capables d'arriver à une entente que les deux avec médiateur arriver que un agrément avec lui. À opposition, si que yo pas fait li, yo pas 40 ans yo, il y a pas li au gré de juge là pour prendre décision sans que yo même yo pas gagner trop bagaille que yo capable de dire là-dedans.
And what happens if you can't have an agreement? Well, then you're going to have a final hearing. And it's just like a regular trial, but with divorce, there are no juries. It's going to be decided by one person, a judge, and he or her are going to make the final decisions about the case, about the contested issues. So sometimes you can go to mediation or you can have a settlement of most of the terms, but let's say you can't agree on a few things, you can go in front of a judge and both sides will present evidence like they would in a regular trial. And then the judge, he or she, will make the decision of what they believe about the contested issues.
Alors, dans le cas que l'entente là pas capable de faire sous médiation, il y a une kounya là, nous pour aller dans le jugement final à la cour devant le juge là. Le juge là lui-même, il peut attendre les deux parties. Et puis lui-même, il peut trancher question, il peut prendre une décision. Et puis comme ça, c'est ça qui va arrêter pour nous-mêmes comme décision que le juge là, il peut prendre. Parce que pas un jury qui chita pour tant des cas pour pas un verdict, mais c'est un seul monde, juge là qui va décider après qu'il finit de parler avec les parties dans tout ça.
Another, and we talked about it, the simple divorce, and this is only for certain couples to dissolve their marriage. It's typically if there's no assets and no children. I will tell you this is the way to go, and it's designed to be simple. And for some people, you don't even need an attorney. As I mentioned before, they do have really good services in Dade and Broward County, self-help services where you can fill out the paperwork yourself. Obviously, it's a little more work for you because hiring an attorney is going to do all that work that you're having to do, but it is designed to be a simpler, cost-effective way to process a divorce.
Alors, comme nous disons dans Dade Broward, il y a un système qui est en place, côté que vous-même sont capables, pas gagner bien, pas gagner aucun dispute, pas gagner rien à résoudre, c'est juste un divorce. Vous capable dans un programme qui pour aider tête ou capable aller, ou capable remplir tout papier. Bien entendu, là pour un avocat, lui-même gérer tout bagage ça, mais on même capable faire tout. Et ça capable de coûter au moins l'argent. Pour que ou-même capable de gérer ça dans le cas de pas rien ici que un avocat bien pour t'arrêter pour.
Now, not every divorce can be a simple divorce. There, both parties have to agree to this type of divorce. Number one, and there cannot be any minor children or dependent children, and of course, neither party is pregnant, and that you've lived here for 6 months, like I mentioned before. You can do a simple divorce with property if both parties have already agreed in advance on the separation of property. You can do a simple divorce. Cannot do it if there's any children involved. It has to be a regular divorce with all of the financial requirements, but always a best option if you can keep it simple. No question about that.
Alors, pour un divorce simple, même les que moun yo ta gen un bien, une propriété, yo capable de faire un divorce simple, moyennant que au préalable, deux moun sa yo capable entendre yo, c'est qui gens y a divisé propriété ça que yo gen. Donc, si yo capable de faire ça, eh bien, yo capable de continuer à faire un divorce. Mais dans le cas que gen un petit moun, c'est un divorce régulier, pas un divorce simple dans ça, parce que vous avez besoin de toute une autre gamme de bagages qui pourront entrer en termes de affidavit, de support et puis finance pour connaître ça, etc.
Now, when it comes to the children, the laws have changed a lot in the last 10 years, and they continue to change. But basically, the policy of Florida is to ensure that each minor child has frequent and continuing contact with both parents after the parties have separated. So they want to encourage the children to have and foster good relationships with both parents. And of course, that is obvious.
Alors, en termes de un divorce normal, côté qui gen ti moun, kot la li toujou favorize, ede pou ke ti moun yo kapab kontinue genye rapport égal égaux entre les deux parents et ils fait tout ça ils capable pour aider situation ça à continuer de manière que pour ti moun yo pas dépayser ou séparer de aucun parent.
And the other big key here in Florida that the courts want to ensure is that both parents share in the rights and responsibilities and the joys of raising a child. So they give both parties the same consideration in determining the responsibility of parenting and things like that. So we call it parental responsibility, refers to how and who makes the major decisions about the minor child. And in most cases, they want that parental responsibility to be shared by both parents equally here in Florida. It doesn't matter if one child lives longer more in one household. The decisions, the major decisions, where they're going to go to school, things of that nature should be shared, as we call it, shared parental responsibility.
Les responsabilités des parents, eh bien, quand la vle, les deux parents, ils séparés, responsabilité ça, ils partagé entre eux-mêmes, de manière que toute décision majeure qui apprend pour tout le monde, les deux parents, ils prennent ensemble. Il inclut qui l'école ils pour aller, qui genre de bagaille qui a fait. Et dit pas tellement trop si gagne un parent, un petit monde qui passe plus de temps avec un parent ou l'autre. Mais les grandes décisions majeures qui apprend, quand la remet les deux parents, ils sont capables d'entendre sur ça et ils deux sont capables de prendre ensemble.
Believe me, I know this is not easy, and I will always encourage people to work hard, especially if there's children involved, to keep a marriage together and keep the family together, because this shared parental responsibility does require that both parents, even if you're divorced, you're going to have to work with each other so that the major decisions that are affecting your child and the welfare of your children is determined jointly. That's the right of each of you. So you have to agree on certain things, or you're going to have to run back and forth to court every time one parent has a problem. So it is going to be a process of learning how to share this responsibility with an ex spouse, which I know is difficult in some circumstances, but that is one of the responsibilities that comes with having children.
Nous connaissons que lui peut-être est capable difficile des fois les gains un divorce. Mais dans l'esprit pour qu'il y ait un petit moun yo OK, il faut que les deux parents soient capables de joindre une façon côté que yo même yo capable de converser et parler de bien-être petit moun nan, de qui ça yo capable de faire avec petit moun nan, les une décision qui pour prendre que yo capable retirer yo la donne et garder bien-être petit moun nan pour yo capable de faire ça parce que nous connaissons ça, c'est très important. Parce que si nous pas gagner comme ça, chaque fois qu'on décision pour c'est dans code pour courir aller pour nous prendre juge à forcer nous, c'est un problème.
There are exceptions. Sometimes the court will help with making decisions like that, or in some cases, they will give one parent the responsibility so that you can have sole custody of one parent. The court can determine that if shared parental responsibility would be detrimental to the child, if it wouldn't be helpful to the child, then they can make it that one person is responsible for making those big decisions that we've talked about.
Alors qu'on y a instance côté que basé sur ça qui est présenté devant un juge là qu'on prend une décision pour quitter son seul parent, qui gagne un droit de responsabilité, qui prend une décision, etc. Mais c'est un cas très rare côté que gagne un indice ou preuve qui montre que séparer ou partager responsabilité, pas bon pour tout le monde. Non.
The other thing the court's going to require, and they'll do it for you sometimes, but it's one of those things that if you can, you definitely would like to try to agree on. And that's called the parenting plan that you submit to the courts, which includes responsibilities for daily tasks like time sharing, who's going to get the child and when they're going to get the child, decision making related to things like healthcare and school and other activities, holidays, who's going to get the holidays for the kids, or how are they going to alternate back and forth during holidays. All of this is put in a giant plan. We call it a parenting plan, and it lists out all this information. So later on, 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years later, it's all there, and we don't have to run back and forth to court every time we want to decide where someone should go for Thanksgiving.
Alors, pour décider tout le reste bagay yo gen un plan de parents que yo fait. Et dans plan ça, yo adressé tout bagay la donne en termes de à qui est son petit monde nan pour vivre. L'autre là, qui plan de visite qui gagne pour lui-même. Les jours de fête, à qui est-ce que tout le monde a passer fête ça yo, dépendant de qui ça que lié. Donc, tout ça, il déjà dans plan de parents, côté que chaque fois, nous pas besoin de courir dans côte pour décider un bagage. Donc, il y a un plan qui est agréé par les deux, que chaque monde gagne un détail, non, mais ça plan est.
What do we talk about when we're talking about children and divorce? The courts want to know, and what the judges are required to think about is what is in the best interest of the child when considering any of these parental issues. When it comes to child support, that's going to be done pretty simply on a guidelines. We take your net income and we decide it that way. But when it comes to decisions about the children, it's what is going to be in the best interest of the children. And that's what the courts, the judge has to determine when making these decisions. One other thing, Florida law does require that both parents attend a parenting course before getting a divorce in marriage. Some courts might even require the children to participate in a program, but the parents do have to go to a parenting course so that they can. That is one of the requirements to finalize the divorce here in Florida.
Alors, en termes de support, comme ça, quand là, vous capable d'établir par différents moyens, côté que vous regardez, tout ça qui peut au bénéfice pour tout le monde, qui peut favoriser tout le monde, qui peut supporter les familles, quand là, a toujours accentué sur ça, dans décision qui peut prendre.
One of the most complicated parts of a divorce, obviously the children, is emotionally difficult, but the process there is pretty straightforward. But of course, it gets a little more complicated when we're talking about the division of assets and debts. Assets can be cars, houses, even retirement pension plans, business interests, cash, stocks. Those are all what we call assets.
Alors, à part de décider pour bien-être Timon, il y a une séparation de biens et dettes. Donc, si on a un cas, il y a un compte en banque, il y a un plan de retraite, ou l'autre qualité d'investissement que vous gagnez, eh bien, vous allez capable d'arriver sur une entente qui gens que bagay ça pour le séparer, et si vous avez une dette qui gens qui est qui peut être responsable pour payer pour what.
And then, of course, we have debts. That's things like your mortgage, your car loans, your credit card accounts, and any other amounts of money that you owe or your spouse owes. These are your debts.
Alors, dette que nous devons, c'est tout bagay qui a rapport à ça. Nous-mêmes, nous devons en termes de mortgage, nous. Si nous avons une machine, nous devons refinancer, nous devons acheter, ou whatever, et achat que nous devons faire, que nous devons comme sous yo.
And remember, there's two types of assets and debts in Florida. It sounds complicated, but it's pretty simple. There's non-marital and marital assets. Generally, any asset or debt that you acquired during the marriage is considered marital and subject to the laws of distribution. So if you were married and after 5 years of marriage, you decide to buy a house together and you live in that house together for 10 years, well, that's a marital asset. That is an asset that was purchased during the marriage, and that is considered to be split between the parties. There are also assets called non-marital assets, and those are assets that you have that you brought into the marriage prior to the marriage that were acquired prior to you being together.
Alors, il y a une dette que nous parlons de séparation de biens. Eh bien, séparation de biens ou assets que nous-mêmes nous gagnons, c'est tout ça que les deux parties ont fait ensemble après mariage là. Si après 2-3 ans, nous achetons un caille et nous étions là-dedans pour quelques années encore, Fait que si un divorce qui a été fait, eh bien, quand ça est supposé séparer entre nous deux, hein, dépendant que qui décision que vous prenez sur ça.
Now, Florida is a equitable distribution state. That really kind of means that the marital assets and debts are equally divided between the parties 50-50, and then they are distributed. Um, they're supposed to be equitably. So typically, we take your assets, we take your debts, we put them all together, and then we split it 50-50. There are lots of exceptions. I'm not here, as I always tell you, to uh, teach you everything about the law, just to point out a little bit about what that means. But equitable distribution is based on a list of factors that the court considers. But basically, if you bought a house together and you get divorced, just think of it as you each get half of whatever the asset is. And you would also owe half of the debts together. There are lots of exceptions. I could spend weeks on that, but just generally, it's an equitable distribution 50-50 split here in Florida.
Alors, en règle générale, en Floride, séparation de biens ou de dettes, eh bien, est équitable en ce sens que chaque partie est responsable pour moitié là-dedans. Bien entendu, il y a l'autre circonstance, côté que il y a l'autre considération qui est capable de faire, dépendant de sa réalité à payer, les communautés acquérir bien ça.
I don't want to get too much into the next portion, which is alimony. That is a situation where court consider alimony to either spouse. By the way, it's not a woman or man thing, but that's basically like child support. It's spousal support, where one spouse is required to pay a certain amount of monies to the other spouse. There's a lot of different types of alimony. There's gap alimony, rehab alimony, lifetime alimony. And a lot of it is going to depend on the length of a marriage. If you're married for 1 or 2 years, not much of an there is no eligibility for alimony. But typically we look at longer marriages like 10, 20, 30 years, and the law deals with those different lengths. And again, I don't want to get into too much detail other than there is provisions for spousal support alimony in Florida.
Alors, l'autre bagaille que nous va dire trop sur lui, c'est alimony. C'est support pour yon membre monde qui a divorcé. Mais ça, il y a une considération qui fait sur lui, il y a un peu différents types d'alimony et ça dépend de combien de temps nous t'es fait marier avant que nous n'en besoin pour être capable de considérer bagaille ça.
I remind you again, this is Jonathan Kane, and we're coming to you live this Saturday morning, and we come to you live every Saturday morning, and we are here live at the office, and we'll be taking your phone calls in a few minutes. We'll try that out again this week. We'll take your calls live here in a few at 954-523-5123 or 305-545-5123. But let me remind you also, if you get involved in a car accident, if you have a work accident, if you need help with the law, we're available for you. We've been here for over 30 years together. We've worked together. I've met so many of you over the years and helped so many of you and your family, and I want to continue to do that. And we do that partly by giving a free consultation. That's my way of saying thank you to you, but my way of getting to meet some of you when you have a legal problem. I certainly hope you never need us, but if you do, we're here, 954-523-5123 or 305-545-5123. I do ask, as I always do, if we're not available, I've had a few calls coming in this morning. If we're not available, please leave your name and your telephone number and give me an opportunity to call you back.
Alors, vous avez écouté avocat Jonathan Kane en direct de bureau li dans Sunrise. Et nous tous qui gagnent n'importe quelle question sur ça que se parler là, nous capables de lire en personne directement dans le bureau à matin, dans 954 523 51 23 ou dans 305 545 51 23.
One other thing, a couple other things to consider when we're talking about dissolution. There can be very important tax consequences in a dissolution of marriage, including especially with the children, the dependency, and the tax credits with children. There are some issues if there's alimony involved. So knowing your tax consequences before you sign a settlement agreement or before you finish your divorce is important. If you have an attorney, Depending on your circumstances, they may recommend that you speak to an accountant just to make sure you understand um, the tax consequences before you make any kind of agreement, especially if you're making a settlement. Before finalizing that settlement agreement, I think it's important to understand the tax consequences, because once you sign these agreements and you enter final judgment, it's very difficult to correct the mistakes you've made. So that's something people don't necessarily think about. Typically with children, we alternate the tax credits, but again, that is something that is dealt with in the divorce and needs to be considered.
Alors, il est important pour nous considérer conséquences taxes qui peuvent gagner, parce que si nous gagnons plusieurs petites, nous chaque capable de gagner dépendant dans ça. Donc, en pile cas, il est important pour nous checker avec un comptable pour que nous capable de garder pour exposure que nous pouvons gagner en termes de taxes avant que nous signions un papier pour faire un agrément pour résoudre toute difficulté ou tout point qui gagne ce divorce là avant que nous allions dans court pour finir avec ça.
Probably the question that I've always heard when I'm talking to people about divorce is child support. I've had so many people come to me and say, "Hey, I just want to get a divorce." And my wife and I, or my husband and I, we've talked about it, and we don't need to worry about the child support. We'll deal with it ourselves. And I will tell you that that is not how it works here in Florida. If you're getting a divorce, I want you to know that if you have children, you and your spouse each have a financial responsibility to support your children in accordance with your own income and their needs. That is the law. And in Florida, child support obligations are established by the guidelines, and there's no agreeing not to do it.
Alors, en pile fois, nous avons un pile monde qui vient côté nous qui dit nous que bon, nous besoin d'un divorce. Bon, nous avons un petit monde, mais nous pas besoin de faire rien quand ça fait petit monde, nous avons géré ça pour compte nous. Malheureusement, la loi n'est pas comme ça. Parce que soit on demande un divorce ou en Florida et que vous avez un petit monde qui est mineur, et bien, considération gagne en place pour que vous assurez de bien-être, petit monde, vous assurez de tout bagage qui a rapport avec vous, correct. Donc, on ne peut pas prendre une décision ça pour qu'on tout ou quitter en dehors de ça qu'a réglé.
And when we talk about the child support guidelines, I want you to understand these guidelines are for every type of family based case. It is based for everyone based on income of the parents, and of course the number of children involved affects child support. There are It gets complicated now because there are certain deductions and credits that you get depending on the amount of nights that each child is staying at each house. There's also payments for health insurance that could be required. So I don't want to spend too much going into it, but there are a lot of considerations. But basically, it's going to be based on the Florida guidelines that are published. You can Google them, and you can pretty much figure out what your child support would be just based on your income.
Alors, pour gérer ça, vous avez un pile guide que vous mettez en place pour que si que vous besoin de figurer selon comme qu'on fait, combien de responsabilités financières vous pouvez lier dans un divorce qui gagne un petit monde, eh bien, vous capable Google et ça, et vous avez besoin d'informations qui sont liées.
Your obligation for child support is going to end when the child reaches 18, or if they get married before that, or they're emancipated. Emancipated means that they go to the court and ask to not be your child, or if they join the armed forces. It can extend beyond 18. Typically, it's till the child is in high school. So it can go as far as 19 if the child is in high school.
Alors, les obligés, les regarder combien de temps qu'on va gagner pour payer child support selon guideline ou regulations. Eh bien, il y a des gens qui graduent dans high school à 18 ans, il y a l'autre c'est 19, quand il y a 22, il y a l'autre c'est 20 ans. Donc, on va gagner pour payer child support jusqu'à côté maintenant, jusqu'à high school.
The big issues, again, I don't want to get too detailed about child support. It's complicated, but basically, you're going to have to consider the amount of child support, the method of payment. That's an important one. Sometimes you can pay directly to your spouse the money. Sometimes the court is going to require that the spouse make payments into the court registry or into the child support system. Um, and we can do it that way. It looks like we have a live caller, and I wanted to get to live calls this morning. So we'll start opening up the phone lines to take your calls. Let's try this first call. Good morning. Bonjour.
Good morning, bonjour.
Oh, did I lose?
Bonjour.
Bonjour.
Yeah, doctor, I have some. Oh no, I am not. I don't want on here. No on here.
You want to call to your office, he doesn't want to talk about it on the air.
Okay.
Alors, les avocats dans le bureau après choix, s'il vous plaît.
Yeah, we're working out the kinks. If you're calling here now, you're listening to us live here on the radio. I'm not kidding when I tell you we're live here every Saturday morning. So we'll take your calls live, and we are doing it directly here from the office, 954-523-5123 or 305-545-5123. Of course, for that caller, when we're done with the show, of course, you can call. And I always remind you, we do our best to answer the calls as quickly and as efficiently as we can, but sometimes we're unavailable. So I do ask, especially if this gentleman calls, if he calls and we're not available, please leave your name and telephone number. I can almost guarantee I will call you back the same day to try to help you and answer your questions.
Comme nous disons, nous en personne, dans le bureau nous matin, nous avons fait un programme ça, live avec vous. Donc, nous avons une question pour nous-mêmes concernant le sujet ça, on n'importe quel autre sujet, nous sommes capables de briller. Dans le cas que nous ne sommes pas capables de parler directement, immédiatement, mais nous sommes très certains de nos théos et nous sommes capables de briller nous encore dans l'office là, après le programme. Non? Et puis, nous sommes très contents de parler avec vous.
I wanted to mention two more things about child support so we can finish up this topic. Number one, it can be changed if there's what we call a substantial change in circumstances by one of the parties. If one party lost a job and now is making a lot less money than they used to make, or on the other hand, now got a new job and is making a lot more money. If there's a substantial change over the years, and that can happen when a child is young, maybe one of the parents gets lucky and gets a new job or what have you, you can go back and modify if there's a substantial change, but that's not just, another $1 an hour. It has to be pretty significant, 20-30% change for you to be able to do that.
Alors, s'il y a quelques changements qui fait dans la situation financière, après le divorce là, qui affecte que même comme il était qu'on paye pour le support là, il n'est pas prêt à la mesure pour continuer à payer même comme ça. Il y a possibilité de capable de retourner dans le code là, demander une modification et by preuve, raison qui fait que le besoin de modification ça, en pile fois, code là capable d'agréer à ça.
Another important thing to know, if you are a wife, you have a right to restore your maiden name, your former name, at the dissolution of marriage. And I tell you that because it's something very easy to do. So if you want to have your maiden name, you can do that in the original petition for divorce. And I bring that up because if you don't do it when you're getting divorced, believe it or not, if you decide down the road, hey, you know what, I want to get my old name back, you'll have to go back to court and file a whole new petition called a petition to change your name. So it is something to think about. Obviously, if you have children, that's a consideration you want to have. But if you want to change your name, it's very simple to do in the divorce process. It's a little more complicated if you wait later on.
Alors, l'autre bagage que nous voulons pointer à ou même si c'est fille, ou t'es prenant mari ou pendant t'es marié, mais si la divorcé, si vous voulez retourner sur une jeune fille ou capable de faire ça durant un divorce là. Parce que si au moment ça qu'on pas fait et que puis devant après divorce là, vous décidez pour raison l'autre, vous voulez tourner sur une jeune fille, ouais, eh bien c'est une autre pétition que vous pouvez faire pour changer non. que ou pral obligé faire pi devant, tant que li très simple dans divorce là ou capable faire si c'est ça qu'on décide qu'on veut faire.
How much should a divorce cost? Well, the more complex it is, the more that you are fighting, the more we call it contested, the more it's going to cost for sure. Um, when you meet with your attorney, they should hopefully be able to provide you a little bit of an idea what it's going to cost. But I will tell you, remember, like anything else in the law, when you're paying an attorney, you're paying them per hour. So the longer you fight and the more that you fight, there is going to be more attorney's fees involved. And there's no way that an attorney can predict the future exactly or estimate how your spouse is going to respond or how their um, lawyer is going to respond. So anything they tell you is just an estimate of what the final dissolution is going to cost you.
Alors, prix un divorce li varie, simplement parce que il n'y a aucune façon pour prédire à l'avance combien de temps qu'on va le mettre si il y a un pile ici, un pile bagaille à résoudre. Techniquement, avocat est chargé par heure pour faire divorce là. Mais si il y a un pile bagaille, un pile complication là d'année, qu'on ouvre l'encre, un pile répète, then il vient coûter au plus l'argent parce que plus temps que l'avocat est mettre pour gérer question ça, eh bien c'est plus que ça va le coûter.
When I said earlier that a divorce can get expensive, it can. So it is really important, if you can, to try to minimize as many issues as you can. Try to work out as much as you can. I know it's a tough situation when you are getting divorced. People that are getting divorced typically are not having great communication issues, have some communication issues. But I would suggest, if you can, to work out as many of these details and issues as you can, because as we talked about, if you can, then you can do a simple divorce. And a simplified divorce, as we mentioned, you're not going to be spending all that money on attorney's fees and other costs like you will the more you fight.
Alors, si nous-mêmes, comme nous disons, c'est un divorce simple, pas de aucun issue pour nous continuer, pour nous résoudre là-dedans, il y a un pile de circonstances que nous sommes capables de faire un divorce simple. Nous-mêmes, ou un avocat capable de faire, mais dans tout l'autre cas qui est compliqué, qui a un petit monde, qui a bien, qui a pas quelque l'autre bagaille, qui a une dette, etc., nous avons besoin de service d'un avocat qualifié qui pourrait aider nous gérer question ça.
We have a few minutes here on what you need to know about the law, and I'd love to take some phone calls live here on the radio. Give this new system we got a try. You can do that by calling us directly here at the radio. I'm sorry, here at the office, 954 523 5123 or 305 545 5123. We'll take any questions that you have about the law. We're happy to try to answer some of your questions about divorce, but of course we can talk about car accidents, work accidents, any questions that you have about the law. We do our best to answer it. And remember, when you call into this type of program, you're not only helping yourself to get an answer. Hopefully, by calling in, you'll help someone else learn something that they need to know about the law.
Alors, comme vous entendez, ligne téléphone, non, comme c'est live dans le bureau, non? Même si il y a n'importe quelle question concernant ce sujet, ça, ou l'autre sujet légal que nous avons demander à avocat, relais dans 954 523 51 23 ou dans 305 545 51 23. Comme ça, le capable de répondre aux questions avec nous, parce que en personne, dans le bureau, a fait programme ça avec vous.
And again, I take a lot of pride in the free consultation because, first of all, I can tell you that over the years, I've had such an opportunity to meet so many great people because of that. So I tell you to take advantage of it because, one, it's a service. There, we got a caller. Let's try this out. Good morning, bonjour. Good morning, bonjour. So I tell you to take advantage of it. Oh, we lost that one too. I think people are thinking they're calling the office, but you're live on the radio. He heard himself as we heard him on the radio, but we'll take a few more minutes to try this out. Everything takes time to learn, and I know you're used to calling the radio live, but we're going to take your calls here at 954 523 5123 or 305 545 5123. What makes it easy? After the show, if you don't have a question here live, you can put that phone number in your phone or maybe write it down now. and put it in your purse or your wallet. That way, when you have a legal problem, you'll know where to call. And I remind you as well that, of course, I don't handle every type of legal matter, just like a doctor doesn't handle every type of medical issue. There are specialists out there. But what I do try to do is promise that if I can't help you, then I'm going to do the best I can to find somebody that can or point you in the right direction.
Alors, comme on dit, c'est en personne live dans cabinet Kenen Vital dans Sunrise que le programme ça a fait matin. Donc, nous invitons tout le monde qui a n'importe quelle question, au lieu de radio, à les avocats live dans le bureau 954 523 51 23 ou non 305 545 51 23. Comme ça, il est capable de répondre à la question nous et nous capables édifier l'autre monde qui peut-être a un problème semblable. Yo même tout capable de joindre une réponse à la question ça. Là, nous-mêmes, nous relais avec question pas nous et qui bénéficient toute audience là avec nous.
And again, one of the other last things I want to talk about that free consultation, I do it because over the years, I have seen so many good people do things that aren't so good, not on purpose, but make decisions that weren't great decisions. And I often think about it, if they would have taken 2 minutes to make a call and just check or make sure that they weren't doing the wrong thing, they would have saved themselves a lot of hard work and really aggravation, and in some cases money. I just had it last week. Somebody had bought a piece of real estate and didn't have a lawyer, and I think it would have helped them a lot, and I would have suggested that. Let's try this call. Good morning. Bonjour.
Good morning. Hello.
Hello, we're here.
Hello, bonjour.
Oui, s'il vous plaît, en question. Si par exemple, il y a un qui divorce à madame, et puis, il taxe sous ça qu'on touche. Si par exemple, moun sa vin gen un petit cob dans la parabole ou bien dans l'autre, est-ce que ça tu peux ça monter?
Après divorce, il gagne l'autre.
Yeah.
This caller wants to know that he got a divorce from his wife and he had child support in place. But after the divorce, he won the lottery. And would that modify the child support that he was paying prior to him being a winner in the lottery?
I got to tell you, that one is a stumper. I do not want to answer that over the radio. Child support is based on income, and frankly, I'm not sure if the lottery proceeds would be considered child support income or just what we call a non-marital asset. Because once you're divorced, any assets you have are become non-marital again. That is an excellent question. I would suggest that caller definitely get in touch with his original divorce attorney and find out, because I don't even know the basics of what's going on in his case, but that is a great question, and I'm a bit stumped. And most of all, congratulations. That is awesome news. But yes, please call your lawyer, because that's one I'm going to have a hard time answering.
Alors, comme vous entendez, monsieur avocat, il suggère qu'on relève avocat qui te fait divorce là, parce que le pas connaît particularité qui te gagne dans divorce là, dans octroyer et child support et tout ça. Cependant, une fois qu'on finit divorcer, whatever bien qu'on acquérit après divorce là, il retourne sous bien ou même pour compte. Est-ce que selon l'agrément qu'on te gagne, est-ce que ça va faire une différence ou non? Il ne peut pas répondre à question ça parce qu'il n'a pas prévu d'informations ça. Il suggère quand même que vous contactez avocat qui fait divorce là. Entre-temps, il dit congratulations.
If he wants to call me next week when we're in the office during the week, I would love to. I'm curious now, so I'm going to probably look it up after we finish the show. But if he calls me next week, I can try to see if it's an easy answer for him. Or again, he paid for a lawyer to help him. I'm sure if he called his prior lawyer, they'd be happy to give him that information.
On vous tenez avocat très content continuer la conversation ça avec vous semaine prochaine dans le bureau. Dans le même numéro il est là 954 523 51 23 ou non 305 545 51 23. Il est très curieux pour joindre quelques réponses qui sont capables de satisfaire vous. Alors communiquez avec lui.
All right. Well, unbelievably, it looks like we've come to another close of what you need to know about the law. I want to thank you so much for all the loyal listening over these years and remind you if you need us, we're here 954 523 5123 or 305 545 5123. God bless and bonne fin de semaine.
Alors, nous remercions toute l'audience là, tout le monde qui était avec nous live. Jeudi, nous invitons au samedi prochain, la même chose. Entre-temps, nous disons tout le monde merci beaucoup et une bonne fin de semaine.